Every single one of them, 100%. Don't like paying taxes. I get it. But they're saving, call it 30 to 40 cents on the dollar for every dollar that's not bankable, right? And they're losing from a business multiple standpoint, say it's $3 to $5 for every dollar that's hidden or can't be found.
Started from the hustle, now we playing it smart. Put the system in position, took the grind out the heart. Got a team on a vision, every role playing part. Ain't no job, it's a business, that's the real boss art. We the 2Exit Podcast.
Welcome to Exit Factor North. I'm your host, Sam Mitchell, with my, what would I call these guys? My co-consultants. We're joined today with a unique individual. Man, I was reading his bio, and when I start seeing that at 17 years old, this guy was an entrepreneur. This guy exited his first business at 17, when most of us just now getting off our mother's milk and trying to figure out what we want to do in high school and college. Matt, you were cultivating the sale of your business. We're joined today with Matt Euler. He's the CEO and owner of AMP Success. And Matt, when I was reading your bio at 17 years old, and we at the Exit Factor here, Exit Factor North here in Atlanta, our president Josiah Wiley and Maurice Grant, one of our consultants. But Matt, reading your bio at 17 years old, what in the world, when most of us are still trying to figure out our prom date, you exiting a business, how did that happen? And then welcome to our world. Well, better yet, welcome to your world.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Sam. Thank you. And actually, I'll have to double check my bio, but I started my first business at 17 and then exited it at 26. It was not still on my mother's milk at that point. It was 26 years old when I exited.
Well, Matt, when I get scared, I still scream for my mama. So, hey, that may be you.
Yeah.
But that mother makes me feel. But man, at 17 years old, look, a lot of us was called ourselves, quote unquote, entrepreneurs. I had a paper route. I delivered groceries. I cut lawn, raked leaves to make money as a kid. And in my mind, that was a business. But you, on the other hand, you took a different route. You had a quote unquote real business. What was the thought process in that? What was your background? And then how did you get started in your business?
Yeah, my background, like so many, horrible childhood, all kinds of dysfunction and pain and all of that. And that became motivating. And again, it's not a unique part of my story, but it was what motivated me. So 15, 16, and certainly 17, I was looking around my world and realizing that what I was seeing was not what I wanted. And I decided that business ownership was a path to freedom and independence. And so with the help of one of my teachers, he talked me into, here's, you can do this, you can start out. And the business I started in was a janitorial service. So I started out myself providing that service at 17 and then built it up to 40 employees before selling it at 26 years old.
Now, Matt, so interestingly enough, you built up that business starting at 17 years old. And now you've moved into a role where you've analyzed over 3,000 businesses. You've participated in over 800 transactions, as a business broker. So having sold your business when you were 26, what did selling your own business teach you that most brokers don't really fully understand?
That's a great question. So what happened was I had two divisions of my business, a residential division and a commercial division. I had staff working around the clock. And I sold the residential division by myself to one of my key employees. And then I hired a broker to sell my commercial division. And what I learned from that, and the reason that I got into the business brokerage industry, was because, quite frankly, no disrespect to the broker, he just didn't do much. And as an example of that, I had prepared a whole marketing package because of the dynamic I was in. I actually lived in Arizona at the time and my business was in New Hampshire. And one of my key employees had given notice, so I needed to sell it. Otherwise, I'm moving back to New Hampshire. Well, this broker had lost my whole profile. I mean, all of my financials, my tax returns, everything I had given him to represent my company. And when I was meeting with the buyer who ultimately ended up buying my business, he was asking questions that were included in the package I provided my broker. And I said to the broker, does he not have the package I provided? And he said, no, we misplaced that. And I just saw at that point that not only did I like the process, but I thought there was an opportunity to bring more quality service and care to people. Exiting a business is, for most of my clients, a very, very significant change.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up. Having worked in corporations and also sold my own business as well, like the level of expectations and professionalism and the level of service you can provide to your clients as an advisor, it really provides a whole new perspective on what it looks like, what good looks like, what excellence looks like when you're operating as that business advisor. So for you, like, what would you say your biggest mindset shift was moving from an owner to advisor?
The biggest mindset shift is that for almost every buyer I've worked with, they're putting their life savings, in most cases, into this new endeavor. It's a very, very serious situation for most people. And if it doesn't work out, it's financial devastation for most people. And then from the sellers, not only are they selling their income, they're actually selling their identity in a lot of cases. And so I guess for me, and again, there's lots of brokers out there that do a phenomenal job, but for me, what got me started was truly caring about the lives of the people that I was working with and honoring how important it was to them. It's not just a house, it's not a car. This is a
Mhm.
big deal. And so I bring to it that approach. And then with Amped Success, part of the reason I formed that company a couple of years ago is that there's lots of buyers and sellers of businesses that are not using brokers. And there's so little education out there about the process, which is why the exit factor is such a great tool as well, is that it's most people, it's one of the biggest financial decisions they'll make when it comes to selling a business. And a lot of them just go, Lone Ranger style.
And it's
Well,
interesting you bring that up because as you're talking to a business owner, it is something that oftentimes they have created, built up, spent years of their life working on, and they want to make sure when they transition it over to somebody new, they're transitioning it to the right person that's going to carry that forward. But one of the more challenging parts too is once the business is sold, right? This is a person that had a lot of drive, a lot of motivation, and making sure you also have an after sale plan for your life too is also important. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And I would even say, to your point, I've had lots of clients that I personally believe end up torpedoing their transaction because they don't have purpose on the other side. And literally, the surrendering or the sale of their identity becomes so overwhelming, they just back out or they just blow up the deal. And with some preparation, like you're describing, it helps people to be excited about the next season and chapter as opposed to terrified of letting go and being willing to move on when for most of them it is the right time.
You
It's time to
elaborate
find.
more on, like, a scenario that happened to you, like a client in particular, where it's like that tornado experience occurred?
Yeah, and I'll be discreet because of the
Mm, yeah.
respect for my clients. But I was just working with a transaction, very, very desirable business. And we had, I think it's safe to say, more inquiries from buyers than we have had in the past couple of years. So, very attractive business. But yet, what was unique about it is that we had, let's call it 6 buyers that became very, very serious and didn't proceed. And that's unique. In my world, typically 2 or 3 and we're done. I mean, we don't have to show it 100 times in order to get it sold if we've done our work up front. And just that it wasn't the right fit, and there was a mistake in the accounting, and there was I'm not sure they can do it, and there's so on and so forth. And we burned through a whole lot of buyers, and I think it really just had more to do with the seller's preparedness to let go than it did the dynamics of the deal or the fundamentals of the business or the buyer's ability. And I had another, I'll give you this example, which is a fun one. I was working on a large transaction that had to do with tractor trailers and fleet maintenance and service and all this stuff. And the owner had started the business 26 years before and himself and grew it up to multi-million-dollar transaction. And we were dealing with a private equity group buying it. And big burly guy, I mean, just rough around the edges. And I called him. I said, "How you doing today?" He goes, "I was ready to cancel my deal today." He goes, "I thought I'm making the biggest mistake of my life." And then a customer walked in and was complaining about this and that. And I told him if he didn't get out of that chair, I was going to pick him up and throw him out the door. And he said, "It was at that point that I realized maybe my days in this business are over and it's time for me to move on." And so it's just a fun example of he was ready to cancel and then realized he was just so edgy and so exhausted and so over it. He wasn't the right guy for the job anymore. And we ended up closing that deal and he moved on. But I think it's in most sellers' minds up until the day of closing, are we making the biggest mistake of our life? Or is this the beginning of a whole new chapter to our life?
I want to ask you this, and it's a simple question, but you talked about earlier when you were speaking about business owners trying to sell their business without using a qualified broker, like Exit Factor or yourself. Let's talk about, I think a lot of people, because they're business owners, they think they're smart, they started this business, and they think the transaction is that of a house.
Yeah.
Like you're selling your house. So I think most business owners feel like, well, I started this business, I've cultivated this business, I've made this business a huge success. I've bought properties, houses, cars, different things. And I think they feel like it's a similar transaction as if you're purchasing a home. Talk about the difference and why. Look, it blows my mind. People think they need a real estate agent to buy a house, but not a business broker to buy or sell their business.
Yeah. And I think it's an element, brokerage services are expensive. There's no question about it. And education can be hard to find and it takes time. But I think the answer to the question is that people, and me included, when I'm entering an area that I don't know something, I don't know what I don't know. And for a lot of business owners, they think, oh, the guy down the road is interested in the business. Well, that's simply acquiring or procuring the buyer. That's just the beginning. And it's all the stuff after procuring the buyer where a broker who's competent and experienced brings enormous value. And those are the things where I think people just don't realize. It's like, I don't need a broker to find the buyer. I can put my listing on bizbuysell.com or whatever. But the issues that I think people get caught in, because a lot of times they'll come to me as a broker after that, or they'll come to me for education after they failed with one attempt, is that they didn't have their financials in line. So they weren't, that was not clear. And therefore the buyer got declined for financing, as an example. And several times a year, we have people who bring us the buyer who already got declined and we get them approved because we know how to play the game. We know that's our area of expertise. I also think for a lot of people who looked at selling their businesses, they're not understanding, because they haven't done it before, for most people, what a buyer's looking for. And so you end up with, operational independence and risk diversification and all of these things that are super important to structure a deal well for a smooth transition, that if a seller's never been through it, it's just a whole nother world. It'd be like me trying to build a high rise. I can hire a contractor, sure, but I don't know what I don't know about building a high rise. And that's where somebody with experience comes in a long way, or coaching, like with the Exit Factor, goes a long way.
So, one of the interesting things that I see fairly often on the exit planning, strategic exit planning side is a misconception about what my business is actually worth versus what the actual value is. So when you're talking to a business owner and you're having that conversation, how do you explain the true market value versus the owner's emotional, belief on what that business is worth? And in your experience, how do you come to that point where you're like, that's what you believe the business to be worth, but this is what the business is worth today? I mean, how do you get to that point?
We might have to have another episode because the stuff, there's so much here. When it comes to valuing a business, it's an art and a science. And the science is math, right? And in my opinion, for most Main Street businesses, the math is how much can the business afford to pay for itself and support a new owner. But then the art becomes, is the owner and his spouse, as an example, or her spouse working 50 hours a week each, or are they working 20? Do they have a key person that's been there 1 month or 20 years? Is the business 2 years old or 25? I mean, all of those things are where true fair market value comes into play because that determines where on the scale of financial feasibility the business should be priced to be marketable. And I just had this happen with a client on Thursday of last week where he said, well, listen, my accountant evaluated it and he evaluated it. I'm gonna just call it $800,000 more. I came in around a little over $1 million. He came in at 1.8. And I said, okay, well, I'd be curious to know how your accountant evaluated it, because I'm sure he's good intended, but how many businesses has he actually sold? How many buyers has he talked to about what's financeable and what's not and what they like and what they don't like? That's where the experience of somebody who's actually been through it, in my case, hundreds of times, is so important to determine this is great, this is not so great, this is how a buyer's going to view this is how a bank's going to view this. So there, we could go on, but those are the real factors: art and science, and how much the business can afford to pay for itself and support the new owner. And I'll just wrap up with this point on this. I went back to that buyer and I said, listen, let's plug in the 1.8 number and let me show you what the debt service would be. 70% of the transactions we facilitate, we arrange the financing. So let's calculate what his payments would be, a new owner, her payments would be. And interestingly enough, the payments at 1.8 would have been what the business's discretionary earnings were in 24. So I said to the seller, I said, listen, if you were not the seller and you were the buyer, would you buy a business that if you simply went back 12, 13 months ago, you would have had no profit and may have lost your house and your life savings to buy this business? And he said, no. And I said, and neither would a buyer that I bring to the table. And so that's my job, is to make sure that the fair market value is not what you wanted to hear. It's what I think is actually possible. And then in 70% of the deals, because we arrange financing, it's going to get put up against a third-party business evaluation. So it better be right. Or
Yeah, it better be right. That's right. And you know what's interesting? I was talking to a business owner one time. This was a few years ago. I was looking at acquiring him and bringing him into my existing business. I was having lots of conversations back and forth with him. And you know what he said? I've decided, after talking to my accountant, I don't want to sell because I use my business to pay for my motorhome, my speedboat, my luxury car. I'll take a client out on the boat one time and then the business pays for all that stuff. And I don't think a lot of business owners really realize how some of those intangible capitals in the business can really impact the value of what the business is worth, even if it's making adjustments for those things and taking those out. But what you talked about specifically was a lot of the intangible things, right? It's not strictly about what's your top line revenue. It's not necessarily strictly about what's that bottom line profitability number, but it's about the employees, the structure of the company, the customers, the marketing, all of these other things in the business that add value, right? They have a value on what that company is worth. And that's one of the things that Exit Factor really does. It helps identify some of those intangible capitals and then helps position the business for some transformation to get that higher value by focusing on some of those key things. And it is an interesting thing. I mean, Sam, you've seen it too, where you've had somebody come in and they're like, I think my business is worth $1 million. And you take a look under the hood and you're like, well, actually, we need to have a conversation because it's actually on like 8, so, and we need to focus on some of those things. It's science with the math part, right? And then there's some intangibles. It's not so much scientific that you can really focus in on to really drive some value on the business worth. I mean, Maurice and Sam, what do you think?
I,
Well, Matt, I want to ask you this. When you're talking about bringing capital to the table from a buyer standpoint, what are the things that the people who are looking to invest in these businesses, what are the things that they're looking for? Because again, all is said well and done until it's time to put the money on the table.
yeah.
And the guys that are putting the money on the table, they're going to look under the hood and check the tires and everything else. So what is that process like, and how difficult is that for an owner who's trying to sell their business, understanding that there's going to be a third party that go through their books and go through their records and make sure that number that they're trying to get is justified? Because at the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers.
Yeah, and there's so much there. I'm going to take your question and I'm going to talk about bankable and non-bankable and then investors, right? Buyers. So the point becomes that if there's add backs, discretionary earnings, boats, RVs, so on and so forth, if those are not bankable, that drives value down. And buyer might say, you know what, I'm okay with the price. But if the bank won't lend them the money in 70% of the cases that I'm aware of, there's no deal. And so that's where a lot of sellers, again, without extra factor coaching or other information in some way, they just don't realize that what they're saving. And again, all of my clients don't like paying taxes. Every single one of them, 100%, don't like paying taxes. I get it. But they're saving, call it 30 to 40 cents on the dollar for every dollar that's not bankable, right? And they're losing from a business multiple standpoint, say it's $3 to $5 for every dollar that's hidden or can't be found. So truly, from a financial perspective, there becomes a period of time with the clients you're working with where hopefully they see that saving 30 cents to lose $5 or $3 or it's not worth doing. And that's the time to get that cleaned up. But the other part of your question, the lender wants to see that the business can afford to pay for itself and support the new owner. And then the buyer who's investing in the deal, they want a return on investment. And I've seen cases where the buyer will get so passionate about the business, they want to buy it based on what they think they can do with it.
Yes.
But
The
ideally,
blue sky.
blue sky. And
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about that too. But the other element is that most buyers are going to end up with an accountant, a father-in-law, a father, a brother, somebody who's going to be not attached to the outcome and say, listen, there's no return on this thing. If you had owned this business 3 years ago, you'd be out of business or you would have made nothing. And that's the conversation that I think ends up happening sooner or later for most buyers that either kills the deal. And that's why if the seller doesn't structure the deal up front correctly, they really risk a whole lot by marketing a business that isn't ready to be sold because it's out in the public. Key employees can find out, competitors can find out. I mean, all these things happen. So I think working with Exit Factor or getting the education they need to be ready to go to the market is far better than just throwing it out there and see what happens and sending your books to, hundreds of people and all that stuff. It's just, so yeah, I went on a
Matt,
tangent. Answer your question, Sam?
Perfectly.
Okay.
Yes, you did. Because I think a lot of people get in trouble when it comes down to the money.
Yeah.
We all are excited about our business. We've got clients who that's their baby. They've been in those business 30, 40 years, and now is the time to exit. And we always tell them, at some point, you're going to exit.
Yeah.
Right now, you have a choice on how you want to exit. You hang around long enough, you may not have a choice.
I love that. Every business is ultimately going to be sold or close. They're going to
That's
go out
right.
of business. One or the other. No other option.
We
So
talk about it all the time about how 80% of the businesses out there just close their doors and walk away. And, we focus on the fact that we want you to be a part of the exclusive 20% that sell. And part of the thing too is as a business owner, like 80 to 90% of your net worth is tied up in that asset. Right. So instead of closing the doors, let's get you some money for that asset and transact. So you have something to walk away with instead of an asset sale or just closing the doors or walking away. And that brings up an interesting point. The differences in demographics between people who properly prepare their business for sale ahead of time and those that don't. They just want to sell right now today for whatever it's worth.
Mhm.
And in your experience, how many times do you see an owner that's like too late to, really maximize the value of their business because they just want to sell today instead of having done the proper things earlier on or even take the time now to really work on the business to get the higher value they can for that transaction? What does that look like in your experience? Like, what do you see?
90% have already decided they are selling
Mhm.
regardless of what the outcome looks like. And I actually just worked with a client. He had a private equity group that approached him. He engaged me to help him with that transaction. And the private equity group was just beating the tar out of him. I mean, just earnouts and holdbacks and all kinds of stuff. And I told my client, I said, listen, if we go to the fair market with this, I know I will get you more money. And without being exact, I'm gonna say over $1 million more by going to the fair market. And with all due respect, it's not my decision, it's his. He thought about it for a couple of weeks after that conversation, and he said, listen, I just need you to get me out of here. do the best you can with these folks and get me out of here. Because emotionally, he was beyond the point of being able to make the financial decision that probably would have served him better. And that's fine. But with some planning, had he called me a year in advance, as an example, we might have been able to create a much greater benefit from his exit financially than what he's obtaining. And it's okay. Again, he's done very, very well. It's a decision. But I found that most of my clients, back to your point, the vast majority of them are making an emotional decision, not a financial decision. And I don't mean that derogatorily. I just simply mean they're done and they waited maybe too long.
Until that burnout happens to start
Yeah.
planning.
Yeah.
Matt, is that the wrong time though? That's a good point you brought up. Some owners stay in their business until they're burnt out.
Mhm.
Is that the wrong time to get ready to exit? Obviously, you don't have a choice at that point, but I'm always been the person, you buy low and sell high. I tell business owners this all the time when I talk to people, well, I'm not ready to sell. You may not be ready to sell now. Your business at an all-time high. 2-3 years from now, this market could have changed.
Mhm.
And I always tell people, think about Blockbuster. Think about the opportunity Blockbuster had
That's
to
extreme,
sell,
man. You went to
and they
extremes
chose
with it.
and they chose not to sell.
Man, Sam
And
took the
then
gloves off.
another
Didn't he?
year or two later,
That's
look at
right.
what happened, right? And I learned this, guys, from being a professional athlete. It's not always about when you are ready. You got to be ready when the buyers are ready. And so when they have the money, they may not have the money 2-3 years ago. Quick story. Just finished my NBA playing career. I'm sitting at home thinking about what I want to do. My phone rings. It's my agent. I'm 40 years old. He said, hey, Ernie Grunfeld from the Milwaukee Bucks, the general manager president, want to talk to you. Now, at the time, they got Glenn Robinson, Ray Allen, all these young forwards. I'm a 40-year-old forward at the end of his career. What do they want to talk to me about? My agent said, just get on the plane and go see. I fly in. They didn't want me to play. They wanted me to start my coaching career. And I was like, I hadn't really thought about what I want to do. I'm not sure. And as I was getting out the car, getting back on the plane, the general manager turned to me and he said, it's not always about when you are ready. It's about when the opportunity presents itself. You got to be ready when the opportunity presents itself. And I tell owners this all the time. You may not want to sell, but the opportunity and the money and the value is there. It may not be there a year or 2 or 3 years from now. So understand that. You started this business to make money. It's doing that for you. You didn't start this business to become who you are as a person.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great point. And I think to that point, that's part of what's so great about what Exit Factor provides is that if your business not only is a business that's being operated to be sold, a better business, it's a better business to own. And then you can make the decision when the time is right that it's time to move on, as opposed to for most people, it can be a 12 or 2 year process trying to sell a business if it's not ready. Now, I've sold businesses in as quick as a few weeks under contract and close within a month or two after that. But most of them, it's a 12-month process to try to sell a business. And a lot of times they're getting whatever the market will bear as opposed to what they strategically wanted to obtain from the exit. And so, yes, I do think if somebody's able to, I use a term called engaged indifference. And I think part of what a process like Exit Factor would provide is it gives the seller engaged indifference. And what that means is that I am engaged in this process, but I am indifferent to whether you buy my business or not because somebody else will. It is a good business. It's ready to be sold. It's financially structured in a way. It's financeable. If all those things are in place, then the seller can end up with a level of confidence that I call engaged indifference in their negotiation, in their life. It's like, oh, buyer walked away. It's fine. I'll keep running it, making, 500 grand a year or whatever. I don't need to sell it. Huge difference when you're prepared to sell as opposed to if you just, okay, I've had it, I'm out.
That
Not
aligns
ideal.
that aligns perfectly with the title of our podcast, actually. Like the freedom to exit.
Freedom
The
to exit.
freedom to exit whenever you want on your terms and not someone else's terms. Like, so with that in particular, when do you feel like a person should be actually like planning towards this thing? Is it before they start their business, the day they start their business, or when they're at the point where it's like, all right, I'm burnt out? Like ultimately, when or in general, when is the best time that business owners should actually be planning for some type of exit strategy?
Yeah, so I'm going to divide that up into 2 points. I think operating is if you could be ready for an exit is ideal from day one, right? Am I building value right now that somebody else might be willing to pay me for? That's operating your business. Now, a lot of businesses that I see and some of the ones that I own as well, because one of the things we didn't share in my bio is that I currently own over 20 businesses and have partnered with people and all of that. So I'm on the other side of the seat on a regular basis of the conversation we're in. And I think it's important for somebody when they start to see the writing on the wall, key employees getting tired and might want to move on, partners getting ready to retire or something. Those are the times when, in my mind, I start flipping the switch to, okay, I'm focused on exit readiness. But in my businesses, I'm trying to operate them as if they were saleable anyway.
Right.
It's a better business, it's a stronger business, and it gives me the optionality. It gives the business owner the optionality to decide when they want to sell based on whatever shows up in their life, a health situation, a relocation need, whatever. You've got options.
What would make a difference? Like I know we know for sure, but like paint the story of a business owner that is in that day to day versus you being a business owner and still a business broker and advisor with over 20 companies under your belt. Like, what does
Mhm.
that different of business owners' hats look like?
So for me, I have a financial interest in over 20 businesses. I'm plugged into them. And so I have regular meetings. I review financials once a month. I'm watching the dials and I'm contributing to the success, but I'm not what I call boots on the ground. But in my experience, every business needs boots on the ground. And so the partnerships the businesses I have an interest in, I have a partner who is boots on the ground. They're paid to be boots on the ground and to run the business the way they know how. And so for a typical business owner, most of them are the boots on the ground and they don't have a partner or an advisory board or something outside. It is just them. The advantage of that is they get to make all the decisions they want. The disadvantage, of course, is they don't have this advisory board and then a second set of eyes, and then the accountability, which is such a huge benefit in most things, frankly. As an example, the accountability to have to provide financial statements to partners once a month forces the financial statements to get done once a month and
Facts.
for somebody to read them.
Facts.
And in the businesses that I own without partners, I don't do that all the time because I don't have to.
Mhm.
But it is a better way to run a business to do that every single month.
I feel like that's one thing that's really lacking in general in a lot of business owners is because like they're their own boss in a way, have no one
Mhm.
holding them accountable, so they're holding themselves accountable. And now it's like, well, I don't gotta wake up to and do my taxes. I'll just or look at this or do anything. It's like so they give themselves excuses, and next thing you know, the excuses lead down a whole slippery slope. This messes up things in the organization in total. So I like to look at it as like it's like if you decide to go to the gym, like you can go to the gym by yourself. If you intentionally trying to lose weight, hiring that
Yeah.
personal trainer is going to do a lot more work for you than you just deciding to go completely by yourself.
Well, it's such a great point. I think if we look at top performers, right? Olympians, how many coaches do they have? I mean, 7, 8, 9, 10. They got all kinds of coaches. And so I've tried to emulate that in my life as well, where if there's something I want to excel at, I hire a coach. Why? Because that coach brings accountability. That coach brings an outside perspective. That coach brings all kinds of things to the table that I don't know. I'll give you a simple example that goes right to your point. I decided I wanted to learn how to swim, and not that I would drown if I didn't know how to swim, but it wasn't graceful and I didn't look pretty in the water, right? I mean, it was sloppy. So I hired a coach and she got me way better in a short period of time. And when she retired, so I went every week for a year and a half because she's waiting for me, right? I'm going to show up and I do it and I got better. As soon as she retired, I've been back twice in over a year because I don't have the accountability. And so I personally think a little bit of discipline, business owner that's looking to get a significant financial result when they exit, hire somebody to help. It just brings so much value and will easily pay for itself in my experience. You can, especially in a business, quantumly change the results of your exit with some proper planning.
Now, Matt, I got to
Well, that,
say, you're
okay.
right on there, because when I was an athlete, and I know Sam, you're going to say the same thing probably. I mean, I was like flopping around. I wanted to run a 4 minute mile, man, and I was running like 6 minutes anyway. Just by changing some stuff with the type of shoes I was wearing, some of my form, I got down to that 4 minute mile range. But again, I couldn't do it by myself. I had to have a coach that was training me. I had to have an advisor on my equipment. I had to have a chiropractor follow me around to all of my events to make sure my body was in shape. So I totally get what you're saying. And I know, coach, like it's tenfold for you, like being a professional athlete, right?
Well, the higher the level, the more expertise you need, and people understanding what it goes into this. And I would say, Matt, before we close, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people why it's important to use a broker. Again, we talked about all these things. It's your life business. Most of these business owners, this is who they are. They identify with their business is more than them than who they are. So explain to people before we go why it's important to use a broker, because again, this is your life work, and you would not. Everybody's not an expert in everything. You may have been an expert in building your business, but you're not an expert in exiting your business,
Mhm.
and that's what we do.
Yeah. I work as a broker, certainly, and still do that on a full-time basis, but I'm also going to include exit factor and education, right? Because the reason it's so important is because we just do not know what we do not know. And just like my swimming coach pointed out stuff that I was totally off on, which is why I wasn't moving through the water like a kayak. I was moving through the water like a wounded something. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And the same thing when it comes with a broker. A broker, in my opinion, is not about just procuring the buyer. That's part of what they do. But a broker is about how to structure the sale, how to minimize taxes, how to capitalize on the optimal value, how to obtain or help the buyer obtain the financing. I mean, there's all of these, structuring the deal, focusing on the timing. I mean, all of those things are so important when it comes to something like a business that most people have just not done before. And if the deal is structured incorrectly, the results are quantifiable financially. And so that's the reason that I think I'm going to, instead of broker, I'm just going to call it help and coaching and support to enter this world of liquidating a significant asset with support and help and education as opposed to without. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's absolutely how I feel
Absolutely.
about it. Yeah.
Well, Matt, we appreciate you joining us today, man, on Freedom to Exit. Guys, we are just blessed to have a man who started his business at 17 years old, who's been in this space, who understands not just what it takes to build a business, but more importantly, how to exit that business. Matt Euler, we appreciate you joining Freedom to Exit.